The silence that followed Sarah's exile wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, like the breathless pause before a second strike. For weeks, the house felt scrubbed clean, the air no longer curdled by her whispered venom or the sharp, rhythmic clicking of her heels. I had erased her from the family chat, the photo frames, and the trust, turning the moral architect into a cautionary ghost. But a predator like Sarah doesn't just vanish into the night, she ferments in the dark, waiting for the right moment to contaminate the well once more. It started with a single, pristine white envelope sitting on the mahogany console, the kind of high-grade paper that smells like expensive lawyers and cheap desperation. No return address, just my name written in her signature, jagged script. Inside wasn't a plea for forgiveness, or a tearful apology. It was a formal notice of a defamation lawsuit, a frantic attempt to sue me for the very truth I had broadcasted on that 75-inch screen. As I held the paper, I realized Sarah wasn't mourning her lost reputation, she was weaponizing her absence. She thought that by becoming a ghost, she could haunt my bank account. She mistook my quiet victory for an end, never realizing that in Justice Valley, once the ledger is opened, it doesn't close until the debt is paid in full. The ghost had returned, but she'd forgotten one thing: I owned the graveyard. The silence of the house was shattered not by a scream, but by the soft, insidious ping of a notification. Sarah had realized that if she couldn't rule the kingdom, she would burn the village down. Her pseudo-victim counter-strike was a masterclass in psychological projection. Suddenly, my social feeds were flooded with leaked snippets, carefully edited audio of my voice raised in a single moment of frustration, stripped of the context of her decade-long provocation. She wasn't just spinning a yarn, she was weaving a shroud of false victimhood, painting me as a hysterical aggressor who had staged the dining room incident for clout. The extended family, those living on the fringes of our history, began to waver. I watched the likes and sad emojis accumulate on her public posts about toxic family dynamics and healing from trauma. To the world, she was the weeping martyr in a designer blouse. To me, she was a cornered animal trying to bite the hand that finally held her accountable. She mistook my lack of a public response for fear, never realizing that while she was busy performing for an audience of strangers, I was back in the vault. I wasn't going to argue with a performance artist. I was going to shut down the theater. Justice Valley doesn't trade in rumors, and Sarah was about to learn that a loud lie is no match for a quiet, documented truth. While Sarah was busy curating her persecuted martyr persona on social media, I retreated into the digital shadows where the real bodies were buried. I didn't need to shout to be heard, I needed to calculate. The ledger wasn't just a collection of mean texts anymore, it had evolved into a forensic map of her greed. I began a deep dive into the family trust and the joint business accounts she had managed with such practiced grace for years. I treated the investigation like a surgical procedure, peeling back layers of administrative fees and miscellaneous expenses that didn't add up. The discovery was chilling. Beneath the surface of her high society etiquette lay a trail of systematic embezzlement. While she was judging my career, she was quietly siphoning funds to sustain a lifestyle the family couldn't actually afford. Every luxury vacation she organized and every charity event she hosted was a front for a sophisticated financial hemorrhage. I spent nights cross-referencing bank statements with her social media timestamps, matching her shopping therapy with unauthorized withdrawals. This wasn't just personality friction anymore, it was a felony in high definition. Sarah thought she was playing a game of emotions, but I had shifted the battlefield to numbers. And in Justice Valley, numbers never lie, they only testify. The air in the attorney's conference room was sterile, smelling of lemon polish and impending doom. Sarah marched in, her victim mask recalibrated to a precise level of mournful dignity. She adjusted her pearls, flanked by a lawyer who clearly didn't know he was representing a sinking ship. She looked at me with a flicker of triumphant malice, convinced that her defamation suit was the leash that would finally pull me to heel. She didn't realize that I hadn't called this meeting to settle. I had called it to preside over her funeral. "We are here to discuss the irreparable damage to my client's reputation," her lawyer began, sliding a folder across the mahogany table. I didn't touch it. Instead, I opened my laptop and turned it toward the family matriarch, who sat at the head of the table like a silent judge. "We aren't here for reputation, Sarah," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a tombstone. "We are here for the $600,000. The color didn't just leave her face, it seemed to drain from her very soul. I hit play on the screen, and instead of the dining room slap, a spreadsheet of fire appeared. I began scrolling through the forensic audit, the ghost companies she'd registered, the forged signatures on the business accounts, and the final, crushing blow, a video of her at a private bank branch, depositing a family check into an offshore account. The boardroom didn't erupt into noise. It went deathly, lethally quiet as the moral architect realized her blueprints were actually a confession. Sarah's lawyer slowly closed his briefcase, stood up, and walked out without a word. The predator was finally in the cage. The final blow wasn't a scream, it was the sound of a heavy oak door clicking shut, locking Sarah on the outside of a life she no longer owned. As the forensic evidence was handed over to the authorities, the family didn't erupt in chaos, they simply withdrew. It was a collective, silent excommunication that left her standing in the hallway of her own making, stripped of her titles, her influence, and her seat at the table. Her husband didn't offer a parting word, he simply placed a single set of divorce papers on the table, his eyes as vacant as the bank accounts she had drained. The resolution was absolute zero, a total thermal death of her social and familial existence. In the weeks that followed, the moral architect became a ghost story told in hushed tones to warn the next generation about the cost of hubris. I watched from the window as she packed the last of her belongings into a car that was no longer hers, her once commanding presence reduced to a frantic, hollow shell. She looked up at me one last time, searching for a spark of anger, or a glimmer of triumph she could use to fuel her victimhood. But I gave her nothing. No recognition, no hatred, just the cold, unwavering stare of a ledger that had finally balanced itself. In Justice Valley, the greatest victory isn't the slap, it's the silence that follows when the monster is finally, irrevocably gone. This final victory wasn't measured in the noise of a courtroom, or the chaos of an arrest, it was measured in the restored peace of my daughter's laughter. Sarah had spent a decade trying to build a throne out of our insecurities, only to realize that a foundation built on theft and malice is nothing more than a trapdoor. The ledger is closed, the accounts are settled, and the moral architect is now just a footnote in a history she no longer influences. Protecting your family doesn't always mean shouting from the rooftops. Sometimes, it means moving in silence until the truth is loud enough to shatter the glass house. In this valley, we don't just endure toxicity, we excavate it. If you've ever had to stand your ground against a predator in a designer mask, remember, your silence isn't weakness, it's a recording. This is Justice Valley, where the truth isn't just told, it's enforced.